Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the What a Man podcast. I, of course, am Ty Nichelle, and tonight I have entrepreneur Mr. David Parker with me. How are you, Mr. Parker?
I'm splendid. How are you?
I'm fine. Number one, I want to say thank you for being a guest on the What a Man podcast. Also, thank you for reaching out and taking interest. But before we have our conversation, can you just let everyone know who is Mr. David Parker?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me. Um, Mr. David Parker. Mr. David Parker is a gentleman from Baltimore City, East Baltimore, born and raised. David Parker is an entrepreneur. He is a college graduate, a high school graduate. He is a man who has experienced several different careers and overcome a lot of challenges throughout life and wants to share those things with everybody else to kind of help them get through their struggles and overcome their own challenges.
Mhm. So you say you're an entrepreneur. So let's what branches of entrepreneurship are you in? What is it that exactly that you do?
Exactly. Thank you. So the first thing that I do is I am an ASC certified diesel mechanic. So the original entrepreneurial venture in that regard is as my own diesel mechanic. I do have a mobile diesel mechanic company, and that is my primary focus at this moment. Outside of that, I also dabble in motivational speaking, and that was something that I should have started a long time ago, to be honest with you, but I had to fight through myself a little bit and my own obstacles that I put before me before getting into it.
So number one, I always like to congratulate everyone on everything that they're doing. So congratulations on
Thank you so
uh,
much.
your diesel business. But I want to concentrate on the motivational part. Um, so you said you grew up in East Baltimore. As we all know, Baltimore is a wonderful city, but it has its challenges.
Yes,
If
yes.
any, what were some of the challenges you faced growing up in East Baltimore?
Wow. So there are those stereotypical challenges that I definitely faced.
Mhm.
Um, I grew up in what's referred to as down the hill. For those of us who know, we know. And I, drugs, violence. Um, my parents were involved in drugs for the majority of my childhood, if not all of my childhood. Drugs were definitely they played a big role in my life, and that's not something that I'm proud of course. But because of that, I learned a lot from that.
Mhm.
I avoided the streets for the most part. I did get involved in there for just a little bit in my preteen years, and I had a traumatic experience that got me away from it. That traumatic experience actually involved the drive-by shooting, in which a lot of people were, of course, shot. Two of them were killed, and it just happened to be one particular night that I did not go. So that was a major moment in my life that shifted me to steer myself in the proper direction.
Mhm.
So that yeah, those particular challenges kind of led me to where I am and who I am today. More importantly,
So, if you don't mind, how did how did being a child of an addict, what's that like?
Mm, wow. So as a child, you don't know how to explain it because you don't know that it's wrong. You don't know that it's right. You just know that it is what it is. So that's
Mhm.
the only life that you know.
Mhm.
But looking back at it in hindsight, I realized that there's some unintentional neglect there, and I don't want to confuse anything because by all means, my parents did at least what they needed to do to provide for my sister and I, but they couldn't be fully present. They couldn't be fully emotionally present like they needed to be.
Mhm.
And they couldn't teach the lessons that a healthy parent should be able to teach his or her child
Mhm.
because they were distracted. So, with that being the case, I was left to learn, like any other kid in that situation, a lot on my own. I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do from observing my parents, but also observing the people in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And it it put a lot of things into perspective. And to be completely honest with you, I actually appreciate that experience, because without that experience, I wouldn't have the maturity that I have now. I wouldn't be able to take a step back from challenges and actually analyze the situation.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a big give and take in that scenario.
So when you're growing up down the hill, your parents are addicts, you're a kid or a teenager, let me just say that. You're outside, you're hanging around these people who possibly are selling the drugs or, whatever else have you. But they know that your mom or your dad is an addict.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that that's been a conversation. Now, how does that make you feel, or how does it make you feel to know that any of these people that you interact with on a daily basis, whether it's just walking by saying hi or you see them in the store, could possibly be the person that is selling these drugs to your parent and making them the way that they are?
Yeah. So what I personally did to protect myself from that was honestly just embrace the denial factor. I know they use drugs. The
Mhm.
kids in the neighborhood know they use drugs, and that's mostly because their parents also use drugs, so they know exactly what it looks like.
Mhm.
But it was I kind of instilled it into myself to pretend that that wasn't the case to anybody on the outside. So if they said, "Oh, yeah, your mother get high, or whatever," no, no, she doesn't. She tired, she's a little tired, she's a little sleepy. Oh, what
Mhm.
about your father? Yeah, same thing. He's tired. He was working all night. So that was the armor that I put upon myself to protect myself from it from
Mhm.
the outside, but I could not protect myself from the inside.
Mhm.
Being on the inside, I knew what I was looking at. I knew when I saw certain things around the house, I knew that I could expect to see my parents in a certain situation, or that I would probably just want to stay away from a certain room, not want to go out, not be in their presence for a certain time, because I knew what the reality of it was. So no
Mhm.
matter how much I try to protect myself from the outside, I could not protect myself from the inside until I eventually dealt with that.
Were there any mentors in your neighborhood at the time that kind of helped you and guided you through this?
You know, that's an interesting question, because the mentors did not appear in the form that I would have acknowledged as a mentor. So the mentors during that particular time actually were the drug dealers, the older drug dealers, the guys who were in their 20s and 30s at that point. And they did not guide me through the process of having addict parents. They
Mhm.
more so guided me through the process of surviving on the street. And without going too far into certain things, they taught me how to defend myself in pretty much any circumstance I could be involved in,
Mhm.
whether it would be just me, a group of people, me versus a group of people, me with or without weapons, whatever's around me. They embraced me in that respect, and that's why I would say that they were not the traditional mentor, because honestly, I don't even think that they really looked at themselves as a mentor. I think they looked at me as a potential tool that they could use later. So
Mhm.
they wanted to sharpen this tool while they had the chance.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
had my own plans.
Are you the oldest of you and your sibling?
So I'm actually the youngest. I'm the baby. I
Okay.
like to call my sister's 8 years older than me, but I like to call her my little big sister, because she she's always picking on me about this. But there's no way that I'm younger than her if you have a conversation with us. But that's the reality. Yeah, I'm the baby by 8 years.
Well, I asked that question because I was going to ask you, it's you, your sister, were you forced to be older than what you were supposed to be? Because you said that you're the baby. So did you feel inclined to be, you know, in a sense, the big brother?
Yes, yes. So it didn't force me to play the big brother role, but there was a circumstance that forced me to play a protective man role. So my sister, she eventually moved out when she was between 18 and 20,
Mhm.
and she wanted to get me away from the streets. So when she moved out to the county, and she brought me with her. But I noticed that she was struggling. Financially, she couldn't really make everything happen. And as a result of that, I went back to the neighborhood. And that was when I got engaged in the street life. And I went back there to do my part of providing to help my sister. And that was that short-lived experience that I was telling you about
Mhm.
that ended after that drive-by shooting. During that time span, which was probably about maybe 2 months. It felt like it was a whole year, but it was probably just 2 months. During that time span, I was able to do just that. I was able to provide. I was able to help her with some of those things. So it did make me feel responsible, and it took me to a level of manhood prematurely. Because at
Mhm.
12 years old, I should not have been trying to become a man, but because of the circumstances, I definitely took it on.
Are your parents still living?
Yes, yes, yes. Fortunately, they are. My parents are still living. They
Mhm.
are clean from drugs. So that's something I'm very grateful for, especially as my family develops. I like to have them involved in that in a different respect than they were in my childhood.
And that's good. I was hoping that you said that.
Yes.
So what is that process like as they're getting clean? Like, are you there? Are you around? Because I know that some people, when they are addicts, they say, "Okay, I'm going to get clean. I want to get clean," but they
Yeah.
never take the steps to get clean. So I don't really know how your situation panned out, but did they come to you and say, enough is enough, I want to get clean," or did you sit them down one day and say, you need to get clean? Like, how did that go?
Yeah. So it went differently for each parent. So they were both off and on for a while after I left the house, went on to college and everything. They were still kind of off and on doing their thing.
Mhm.
Um, Shortly after college, when I was already living on my own and everything, my father had a situation that he almost died from. And at the time, I didn't think it was drug related, and it probably was down the line, but immediately it wasn't drug related. He's a truck driver, and there was a circumstance in which he couldn't get out of his truck because he was in so much physical pain, and my
Mhm.
mother had to come from home to pick him up and take him to the house.
Mhm.
Well, I happened to call him 3 days later just to check out on him, and asked him how he was doing. And he said, I'm in pain. I'm not feeling all that great. And as a concerned son, said, Pop, you need to go to the hospital. And my next question is, how long have you been feeling this way? Oh, 3 days. 3 days. So, when he says that, I'm like,
Mhm.
you're dying. So, long story short, I ended up convincing them to go to the hospital after a long conversation of trying to pull it out of him, because he's still one of those old fashioned men that thinks that he could take a nap and he'll be better. But I
Mhm.
know in reality, you could take a nap and never come back.
Right.
So I needed him to go to that hospital. Um, when I met them at the hospital, I realized how real it was when he couldn't get out. And I actually had to pick him up and sit him in a wheelchair. In that particular moment, put a lot into perspective for me, because I went back to being that child who saw my father as Superman despite everything that was going on. But
Mhm.
now I'm saving Superman.
Mhm.
So as a result, he ended up being in the hospital for about 2 or 3 weeks. There was a severe stomach ulcer, hole in his stomach. And throughout the time of me checking up on him, the talk from the doctors alluded to relapse symptoms and stuff like that. So that let me know that there was still some sort of involvement with drugs up until that point. And after that, he ended up getting clean as a result of it. Now with my mother, she had the off and on thing. She didn't get that far.
Mhm.
Um, while he was in the hospital, she was slowly decreasing from it.
Mhm.
But because I knew that she was still involved, I actually ended up having a conversation with her prior to me having the child, prior to me even conceiving the child, about how I wanted her to appear in my child's life.
Mhm.
And it was a hard conversation, because I explained to her that this is what I saw. And I didn't need to see it. And thankfully, I know how to navigate life because of it. But
Mhm.
I will not have my child see it.
Mhm.
And ultimately, it's either you changing this, or my child and my family staying here without you. And I think the reality of that circumstance set in. We shared a long cry together.
Mhm.
And since that, she hasn't been involved in it.
And that's I congratulations to your mom and your dad.
Thank
And
you.
that's awesome to hear because you never it's you hear them, but it's kind of rare that you hear a story that way because some
Yeah.
people do choose the drugs over, grandchildren, family, whatever the case. Some people think, that the drugs are more powerful than these things. Um, I wanted to ask you, you said that your dad did drugs and he's always been your Superman.
Hmm.
So, at any point, did it change the respect level that you had for your dad? Because the what I'm seeing now is like if mainly the father, if they're not at a certain level in life according to the child, there's no respect there. So if you're a father and you're not that present or you don't show up when you're supposed to, why should I respect you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your situation, your father was a drug addict. Was there at any point that the respect level wasn't high?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, but it wasn't at any point during that stage. So during that stage, I I knew that he was doing drugs, but I also knew that he was human. So I was able to acknowledge the fact that he would work 16, 17-hour days, come
Mhm,
home dog tired,
mhm,
still get up and go back again just so that we could have what we needed, the minimum of what we needed. And because of his programming and the way that he was raised in that baby boomer mentality, it
mhm,
was all about just getting the work done, regardless of what you were going through. So that was what I saw. I saw what I was taught that a man was. You don't cry, you don't complain, you just do it and you get on with it.
mhm,
Now, because of the way that he processed his life, um, his personal ups and downs repeated themselves a lot. And he stayed in a lot of the same cycles throughout his life.
mhm,
As a young man, I didn't notice it. As I became a young adult, I understood it, but it wasn't relevant. It
mhm,
didn't become relevant until I had my own family. And once I had my own family, the conversations that we would have would be father and son, but it would also be man to man, an older man telling a young man what to
mhm,
do.
mhm,
However, he looked at it as age equaling experience and
mhm.
wisdom. And I know that age does not equal wisdom because you can do the same thing for 40 years.
Right.
And if you've done the same thing, I think that's a definition of insanity. So once I became a man of my own family and he tried to offer that advice, and I respectfully presented it to him as your advice didn't work for you. Why should I follow it? That was hard for him to swallow. And
Mhm,
as a result, there's been a couple of arguments and everything involving that that led to a minor loss of respect. But because of the level of love that I have for him, the respect can only fall but so far.
mhm. So one thing that you touched on, which was really important, and regardless to how many of these interviews I have, and I don't care if you're a comedian, if you pump gas, if you drive the bus, I don't care what you do for a living. Um, One thing that is most concerning amongst our Black men is mental health.
Absolutely.
So I want to know, do you feel like, because you touched on it, you said your father, he dealt with things, he held it in, that's all you saw. So does that play a role in your life, or are you more prone to the no, I'm gonna cry, or no, I'm gonna express emotion, or how do you handle your situations?
So for one, I like to learn from other people's situations before I have to learn from my own. So I was never a kid who had to touch the stove to see that it was hot. If I saw it burn Joe and Jim, I'm not touching it. That's enough for me right there.
Mhm,
So by paying attention and analyzing what happened in his life and what's still happening, I
mhm,
make sure I pay extra attention to myself and to anything that I have that is like him, so that way I can avoid myself from going down that same path.
mhm,
So that is a big part of it in itself. But in reference to, I think you were alluding to basically being in touch with my emotions. The answer is yes. I am in touch with my emotions, and one reason, and this is relevant, unfortunately, but it's because I'm very secure in my masculinity. So crying does not make a problem for me at all. But I do express my hurt, my concern, my fear, my pain. And the reason I do it is because I know that if I don't, it'll get bottled up. And
Mhm.
humans are just like a container. Any container that you have, you can stuff it as much as you want, but eventually that top will pop off. And a
Mhm.
lot of times when that top pops off with a person, you got suicide, you have people killing other people,
Mhm.
you have massive meltdowns that honestly could have been avoided if
Mhm.
it was just checked in the first place. So hopefully that did answer the question. I definitely pay attention to where I come from to avoid going down that same path.
Okay, so given that you are a motivational speaker, I did check your page out. You had some messages in the mornings, um, and it seems like a lot of people are doing that these days. So then you have, and I'm gonna just say this: I'm not putting you in this category,
Yeah.
but you have people like, and this happened a few years ago, but it's still relevant. You have
Okay.
people like Derek Jackson, right? And he gets on here and he gives all this relationship advice, and all these women thinks he's great and awesome. But then we come to find out that the very thing that he's telling y'all not to do, he's
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
So what about you and your motivational talk? What makes it? Why should we listen to you? Because anybody can get on the phone and say, "Good morning, have a great day. Don't let the devil." Da,
Yes.
da, da, da."
Yes.
But what makes you stand out from everybody else? But why
Thank
should
you.
we be paying attention to your motivation?
Thank you so much for asking that question. That actually explains why I gave it the name that I gave it. So
Mhm.
it's called motivation in the moment. And the reason why I call it that is because I'm not a professional motivational speaker. I
Mhm.
haven't been doing this for years. Honestly, I haven't even spoken to a large group of anybody that I was requested as a motivational speaker. The
Mhm.
reason I call it motivation in the moment is because I'm just like everybody else. And I lend this advice to others while I'm going through it. And that's the biggest part about it. I try my best not to hide it. So in a lot of my videos, the Instagram videos are an abbreviated version of what the YouTube videos are. Those are a lot longer. And one of the main things that I do in every video with every topic, I put myself in that situation in a real life circumstance. So one of them actually pertained to being in touch with those emotions.
Mhm.
And one in particular was fighting pride. So instead of just telling people, hey, you shouldn't fight pride, or you should fight pride because if you give into pride, you don't know what it could do. It could collapse relationships. I actually went on to explain how at this present time, I
Mhm.
am in a situation because of my pride. And putting my side of pride, putting my pride aside, allowed me to get closer to the sunlight of the situation, if you will.
Mhm.
So I do believe that that would be the biggest separation for me is that I'm actually going through the stuff that I'm talking about at this very moment. And one of the ways that I check myself with my source of friends, my close friends, my frat brothers, my family, my wife, anything that I speak to anybody else about, I always ask them to check me and to let me know if I come off as a hypocrite, because a hypocrite is the absolute last thing that I ever want to be. So when I talk to my wife and I tell her, you have to make sure you communicate, you have to make sure we don't go to sleep angry,
Mhm.
I ask her, do I do a good job of actually leading by that example? So I do wish that others could see me checking myself, but at
Mhm.
the same time, if others could see me checking myself, then it will come off as me doing it for that credit. And I don't need that credit. I want it to be 100% genuine. So anytime there's a question asked, there's an answer given.
So you grew up in the same city that I grew up in. There's definitely a difference from now, well, from then to now.
Yeah.
And I've had the first few guests I've had all Baltimore natives, and I asked them all the same question, and it's probably repetitive, but I like to get different people's perspectives. And the city is out of control.
Huh. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
a lot of things aren't the same. A couple things we touched on is the community's not involved like it used to be. Everybody's blaming one person, which is the mayor, but he can't do it by himself. Um, and there are a lack of resources to keep these children or young adults busy.
Yes.
If somebody gave you a check and said, here, take this check and do whatever you want with it, but you have to fix something in the city, what would you do with that check?
That is a very difficult question to answer. And the reason for that is because I honestly don't think that it's something that money can fix.
Well,
If I look at, oh, I'm
hold on.
sorry.
Not necessarily, and I'm sorry to cut you off,
Yeah,
buying.
no problem.
So if they gave you money to build something or create something or just
Okay.
back somewhere, let me be more specific. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So if it was something like that, like if you had an opportunity to build a rec center or, you know, create something to keep people off and out of the streets, what would
Yeah.
that be?
Okay. So with that being the case, you kind of touched on it by saying rec center. I'm not sure when you left the city, but I do remember in my childhood there was something called PAL centers
Mhm.
that I believe it was the city police department involved with it to keep children off the streets and involved in safe and healthy things during the
Mhm.
summertime. But what I would actually do is create an adult version of that, because the adults the adults are, in my opinion, further out of control than the children. And if the children are at a certain point, it's because of the adults. A lot of a lot of the children, the teenagers in this city, because they get a lot of the attention these days for carjackers and everything that they involved in with the crime,
Mhm.
those parents of those teenagers are my peers. And I'm in my early 30s.
Mhm.
And I personally know of a lot of children. This is no offense to anyone who fits this category, but I know of a lot of people who had children before 15. And that is a really unfortunate circumstance, because unfortunately, the child who had the child did not get a chance to finish growing up. And now they are put in a situation where they have to teach another child how to reach a certain level that
Mhm.
they haven't reached yet. So that right there is a major part of the problem, and a lot of that is because further down the line is because of the lack of the proper family structure. If you look at the majority of any city, but we're going to talk about Baltimore City, a lot of the families are incomplete. It's usually a single mother
Mhm.
and several children,
Mhm.
or perhaps it could be a single mother and some aunts or something like that. But
Mhm.
it does not show the presence and the power of having a full family structure. And that was one thing that I realized I was actually blessed to have, because most of my friends didn't even know their father. So I was able to see, because of my experience with my father, that hey, there's somebody that I actually have to submit to. I actually have to check myself when I come to someone else, because this guy's bigger than me, this guy's stronger than me, and this guy will be the person who puts me in check.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the mothers of the young mothers of, and any mother honestly, of say a teenage boy who's going through that puberty stage and he's ready to start feeling himself and challenging everything,
Right.
you can't really expect a woman to be able to properly know how to handle that by herself. And it's honestly not fair. It's not fair for her to do so. So without going too far away, I would focus on properly training and teaching adults how to be adults and how to make sure that they keep things in order for the children that they're raising, if that's possible.
I think that is an awesome idea. That's different. Never heard that. But I do think that that's a good idea. And then not only that, there's so many things that men could learn.
Yes.
Especially reading, writing, how to dress for an interview. It's just, and I have a lot of these ideas. You know what I mean? So I would love to at some point, put some of these things and seminars together and stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, but I do think that that's a good idea. And I was around for the PAL centers. I've only been here for 4 years, but
Okay,
I
okay,
feel
good, good.
like I feel like now, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I think a PAL center situation would not go well in this day because there is not even respect for the police.
Yeah, yeah,
So, um, when it was
yeah.
going on at the time, yes, it was great because I remember it being like basketball and stuff like that.
Right.
But now I don't think it would work. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
um,
that respect factor is definitely major. And honestly, I hate to say it, but there's not even an element of fear for the police, and not necessarily fear and being afraid of the police, but just being afraid of the consequence.
mhm,
Nobody's afraid of consequences anymore because, again, they were never presented with consequences. So
mhm,
why would they be afraid now?
mhm. So you let's backtrack. You said you had a family and your upbringing wasn't that from, seeing two parents that were addicts. So, does at any time in your being a husband or being a father, like, do you have to, as you say, check yourself because you'll feel yourself like slipping into, oh, but then you'd be like, you know what, this is my family. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah,
Does
yeah.
past childhood traumas show up anywhere in your parenting, in your relationship? Like, and if they do, how do you, like you said, check yourself or deal with it?
So as far as my parenting, I've only been a parent for 6 months, so I can't give you a
Okay.
full answer on that. But in regards to being a spouse, uh, the childhood trauma, and I want to be careful about this one because it's really not heavy trauma, but it's still something to pay attention to.
Mhm,
Um, at times, to avoid conflict, my father would give in, and I know this because he wanted to avoid conflict, but a woman does not want a submissive man. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's what he was,
mhm,
but it's a very fine line to tread. Sometimes you gotta check things on the inside and the outside of your relationship to
mhm,
make sure that your relationship is intact.
mhm,
So as I matriculate through my marriage, there were times where I would try to avoid conflict, and because I didn't want to see anything happen, I would take an approach that my wife would think was passive
mhm,
because I took a relaxed approach.
mhm,
The trouble with that is that she saw it as being soft. And she wasn't the only one wrong in that situation. And I couldn't blame her for seeing it that way because if she sees me as being passive, she would potentially see me as being unable to protect. And that is the last thing that I would ever want to display to her. So the fine line comes to walk when you have to be mature enough to know when to walk away and when you're able to walk away. But when you're backed in the corner, sometimes you got to buck. So that's why I was careful about saying trauma because it's not really that heavy, but it can be. And if I was to allow that unintended passiveness to go unchecked,
mhm,
who knows what kind of weaknesses that would present in my marriage and having my wife think that I was unable to be the man that she needs me to be, which fortunately she does not feel that way.
mhm.
So perhaps it worked.
Yeah. So I've had this conversation with a few friends of mine. We always talk about people who use experiences as an excuse, i.e., my dad was never around, so I can't
Yeah.
be a dad.
Yeah.
My mom didn't hug me, so I don't hug my kids. Um, Not gonna lie, I didn't use it as an excuse, but I used it as an excuse.
Yeah.
I was raised by my dad mostly, and he never was the "I love you," but you knew that he did just by his actions. So, how do you feel about people who use that? Like, oh, I never, and I want to go back to the dad thing. Oh, my dad wasn't around, so I don't know how to raise my own kid.
Right.
You would think that some people would use the how did I feel when my dad never showed up, or how did I feel when he said he was coming and he never came, you know what I mean, to be better. Why does
Yeah.
that not resonate with some people? Because some people it does and some people it does not. They just repeat the cycle.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
does that happen?
I think that that repetition of the cycle happens because the person was never prepared in the first place. So,
Mm,
for example, if you have a young man who's saying that my father wasn't present for me, but now he has a child and he's not present for his son, he wasn't prepared to be a father because he wasn't prepared to check that trauma.
mm,
So, the only way to get beyond the trauma, any difficulty, is to check the difficulty. You have to come face to face with it.
mhm.
So I don't know if in those situations, and of course it varies,
Right.
sometimes people are unwilling to confront the sources. Sometimes they are unable to confront the sources. And that's a distinct difference, because if you're unwilling to confront the source of your trauma, then you are going to be fully responsible for the fact that you don't get over that trauma. No one can be held responsible for what you were not willing to do. Now, if it's a circumstance where you're unable to, for example, separation by death, how do you confront a person who
Right.
died?
Mhm. Mhm.
Even still, to be completely honest, that is on the individual,
Mhm.
because it's up to you to accept the reality, embrace the reality of the fact that I will never get to confront this person again. And will I allow my hatred for a dead person to make me create problems with living people? So the fact that those struggles and those traumas go unchecked, that plays a major role in how those things continue to go on, and why people use those excuses. I personally wanted to make sure I didn't use that excuse, and with mine, it isn't necessarily with my father, it's just where I came from.
Mhm.
Where I came from, I wasn't supposed to go to wasn't supposed to go to high school. Wasn't supposed to graduate high school. Wasn't supposed to even have college in my vocabulary. So the fact that I knew that if I stayed in this position from 14 to say 24, 10
Mhm.
years, I may not have put myself in that situation, but
Mhm.
I'm responsible for staying in that situation. Because whenever the situation comes where you realize that what you're doing is not productive, you've
Mhm.
already realized it. Now you know that there's something wrong. So
Right.
now it's up to you to make the change. You cannot continue to say, they put me here, they put me here. That's right. They put you here. But who's going to get you out? I
Right.
learned that about life. Life is not about what happens, it's about what you're going to do about it. And that's for anything, whether it's a situation, a financial crisis, whether it's health, whether it's the fact that your relationship is hanging off on the rocks. What are you going to do about it?
Mhm.
This is the approach that I take to myself right now. As I said, I am going through my own struggles at this present time. And instead of saying, oh my gosh, why is this happening to me? Why? That doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't do anything for my wife, my children, like my kid. It doesn't do anything for any bit of the circumstance. The only thing that does something about it is action.
And I will definitely agree with that. So for the people who do want to check the trauma, they always say one form of doing that is therapy, right?
Mhm.
Everybody can't afford therapy. Everybody doesn't have medical insurance to get therapy. And we all know that therapy is not free. And if it was free, it's only going to go but so far. So if a person wants to check traumas and get themselves out of these situations, but they can't afford therapy, what are some other things that you think that they could do or recommend that they do?
Well, first, let's analyze therapy, right? If
Mhm.
you were to define the word therapy, you probably wouldn't find a psychologist involved in that definition. Therapy would probably be looked at as some sort of source of an outlet to help you escape a problem. So if you just take that approach to it, then you'll realize it doesn't have to be sitting on a professional's couch. It could be confiding in a friend that is free to your access. It could be confiding in nature. So I know a man personally who when he goes through his problems, he's around water. Wherever he goes to the bay, to the beach, wherever he goes near water, and he allows that aspect of nature to help him channel his issues.
Mhm.
So for some people it could be meditation, for some it could be playing with a dog, for some it could be working out.
Mhm.
I think that we need to remove the constraints from our mind, because once we put that constraint, then we close off all options. If we are led to believe that the only way to fixing our problems is to talk to some guy that we can't even afford to get his name, then of
Mhm.
course we're out of the game already. However, mental issues, mental health have existed long before civilization has been what it is today. What do you think people did in medieval times? What do you think Africans did before they came over here to this rock? I guarantee you they did not sit on anybody's couch, and they probably did not pay the prettiest penny or gold for that.
Mhm. Mhm. So, where do you plan to take this beyond YouTube and Instagram?
To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure yet. Um, I have to think about how it came about. So it came about, and its motivation in the moment. It came about because throughout my lifetime I played sports, and in my later years of playing sports, I was a captain. So in that moment, I was amongst the people that I was a captain of. So
Mhm.
I motivated them and also motivated myself in that situation. So going back to talk to teams, to talk to groups, to talk to students, to talk to professionals, to
Mhm.
talk to anybody in a group setting, that is somewhere that I am wholeheartedly interested in doing. But motivation in the moment isn't only about strength motivation, it's also about love and relationship motivation as well. So
Mhm.
with that being the case, I've always been someone who's open and interested in having panels, call and response discussions.
Mhm.
And I did have experience with that in college. There was a few times when I was on a few panels that were based on love and relationships,
Mhm.
and I realized that I was good at it, not because I determined that I was good at it.
Mhm.
People's responses to me is what determined that I was good at it.
Mhm.
And so to find out why those responses were what they were, the subtle, I guess the consensus was the fact that my perspective was extremely different. So I embrace the difference of my perspective as part of that gift. So to answer the question as to where I would take it, it's those panel discussions, it's those group presentations, and whatever else comes from there.
I really, number one, congratulations on the baby. Baby
Thank
6 months
you. Thank you.
now, but still.
Thank you so much.
And also, like I said, congratulations on having a different story to tell, because we all know that sometimes when we grow up a certain way, we're stuck, in that mentality. I'm glad that your parents are clean and everything. Um, if you could offer any advice, and this I always say about, the kids or people that want to chase their dreams or anything like that, but if there was one piece of life advice that you could give someone, and then it's not necessarily chasing a dream, they might be stuck, what would you say to that person?
I would say I would say think about yourself. I would say think about yourself in the present, the past, and the future. So wherever you are, in whatever moment you are,
Mhm.
you've been in a bad situation before. So look back at your history to
Mhm.
help you determine how you're going to navigate your present to get through your future and to get to your future. So
Mhm.
if you look at what you dealt with, examine how you felt before you dealt with the problem, and then what helped you to deal with the problem, and how you feel afterwards. A lot of times in the moment we feel like it's the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to us, but once we get through it and we reflect on it a couple years later, we're like, whoa, what was I thinking? I was really complaining about that. So use that as faith to plant and help you move forward to the next situation or the current situation.
Mhm.
And while you're in your current situation, you're like, okay, I've been through something like this before. Let me find another avenue. Once I find this avenue, you make your way through it. And just to be realistic with yourself, remember that In life, you're either coming out of a problem, in a problem, or on your way to a problem. So it's going to happen again.
Mhm.
And after that, it's going to happen again until the day you die. So as long as you keep yourself grounded to that reality and you reflect on what you've been through to get through where you are to where you want to be, I think that would be enough to help somebody breathe, accept life, and then take life on.
Now, what is one thing that you would tell them not to do?
One thing I would tell them not to do is to try to live for everybody else. So, and again, I'm going to use myself as an example of that motivation in the moment.
Mhm.
Um, when I when I started doing this, I had already been fighting with myself to do it for the previous 2 years prior to that point. And the reason that I was fighting with myself was because I would think about all the people who know me and the people who know me for various things.
Mhm.
Most of them don't know me for this. So they would know me for being a class clown. They would know me for being a frat brother. They would know me for being a football player. But when
Mhm.
they see me doing this, it's like, what? Him doing that? And I allowed myself to have that what him doing that thought in my mind to
Mhm.
prevent me from jumping up. Once I took the effort approach and
Right.
decided to embrace my life for me,
Mhm.
then I was able to put that down. So now, as I kind of move through this journey and I see myself on social media, I am aware that those who had the what him approach, they see it, they don't acknowledge it, but it's okay. It's okay because I know that they see it. I know that they see the fact that I'm doing what I want to do for me. And hopefully it'll encourage them to do the same thing.
Yeah, hopefully it will as well. So what made you continue even after all of this? Of course, yes, you went to high school, you had a family, but what motivated you to keep going? Because I'm pretty sure that in the middle of all of this stuff, there probably have been times in your life where you was just like, especially when you had to go back. Because I can almost imagine, okay, I'm out of here. My sister got me away. We in the county. I don't have to deal with this. But now she's going through things. So you have to go back to the place that even started all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you hold it together even after that?
To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure how I do it. And I don't like to fake that I have the answer to stuff like that because I do acknowledge the fact that there's a force beyond me.
Mhm.
So whatever's instilled in me is because of wherever it came from. Um, my my earliest experience with self motivation, and this is just a brief step back. When I was 5, I was hit by a car and I broke my leg. And what happened in the hospital when they closed the curtain to talk to my parents, I
Mhm.
overheard them telling my parents that I would never walk the same. I'd never be able to play sports, anything like that. I'd probably have a limp. All I saw was myself as a kid. And as a kid, you're not going to tell me I can't play. Now, at this particular moment, I didn't realize that I was instilling motivation in myself. I thought I was just saying no to you and I'm going to go play.
Mhm.
But as I move through different struggles in my life, I do reflect on that moment, and it makes me realize that this is something that was in me all along. I
Mhm.
just had to channel it, understand it, and then put it to proper use.
Mhm. So I might challenge you just a little tiny bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when this airs, and maybe your mom might watch it, maybe your dad might watch it, what would you say to them?
Um, what I would say to them is, "Mommy, Daddy, I'm the same person you talk to every day. So when you see this video, you see the same person that tells you what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he's willing to stand for, what he's not willing to stand for, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and what he will accept and what he won't accept." So I am very proud to say that they will see the very same man that they have a conversation with every day.
And what would you say to them to motivate them in the moment?
To motivate them in the moment, I would tell them to look at what they produced. Whether they realize they produced this or not, I
Mhm.
am a product of them. Now, I did decide to take my matters into my own hand with how I wanted to navigate my life, but my original structure, it
Mhm.
came from them.
Mhm.
And if they think about anything that they're dealing with in their life, any struggles they have, because they of course have their own, to remember that something you did led to some sort of progress and success. Look at the results of what you produce to determine what you want to do next.
So if someone wanted to get some motivation in the moment, how would they be able to do so?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok. You can
Mhm.
find me on YouTube. And the easy thing about it is that it's the same name all the way around, at Motivation in the Moment.
And if there was one thing that you wanted people to know about you before we left that we didn't touch on. So before we wrap up, if there's one thing that you want people to know about you, what would that be?
That I am a work in progress. I acknowledge myself as a work in progress. I
Mhm.
know that I'm not perfect. I know that I will never be perfect. And I'm going to continue to be learning something. I'm going to continue to experience new things throughout my life. And that is what makes me for this.
Thank you so much again for having this conversation with me. And thank you for reaching out and sitting down. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Likewise.
We will absolutely touch base, again and get some stuff together to see how we can help some peoples out or whatever.
Yes, indeed.
So for everybody else, I want to say thank you for joining me and Mr. Parker tonight on the What a Man podcast. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you all next week.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, y'all. Faith is the absolute most important concept to have on any journey, any dream whatsoever. Faith is so important simply because of what it is and what it does. All it is a combination of hope and belief. And when those are together, it allows your dreams and your visions and your thoughts and your concepts to become your reality. It allows what was once impossible, or at least thought to be impossible for you, to become possible. But one of the strangest things about faith in the first place is the fact that faith can challenge reality. If you have faith, you will soon realize that faith does not make sense all the time. It doesn't make sense because we live in a world in which we have to see things to believe them. But faith is the exact opposite. You have to believe them in order to see them. Now, please don't make the mistake of thinking that faith means that you don't have to do anything, that you just get to sit back and relax. You still got to put in the work. But once we come to grips with the fact that all we can do is all that we can do, we might be a little better off in our faith walk and a little better off in our journey.